Okay, let's just quickly cover off some of the ways of taking actions in the Roots of Magic. I will be putting up a link to a full game that hopefully goes into the rules in more detail than I'll be able to do here today, but suffice to say you should be able to learn how to do a few things simply from watching a few of these little videos. So firstly, let's imagine that we have Hephaestus Zant from Merc House of Fear, and we also have Luther Draxos from Durant House of Protection. They're engaged in a duel, and let's imagine that it's Luther's turn to go first. Now, let's further imagine that Luther has a number of actions to use this turn, and let's just say, let's give him 6. Now, the way that you generate actions is in fact very different from this, and I'll go into that in another video, but for the purposes of this particular video, he has 6 actions which he can use to do things to his opponent. Now, when it's a model's chance to activate, they can spend any number of actions in order to do a range of things. They can do something called universal special actions, which means things like walking. So, for example, Luther Draxos has on his card, he has a movement of 3, so he can move up to 3 inches in any direction. So let's just say he moves 3 inches that way. That will cost him 1 action. Now, when you're playing the game, you don't have to put the actions out on the table. In fact, that could probably make the game a little messier with all of the things that might be on the board. You can register it in any number of ways. We have created some dials in order to help you figure out exactly how many magical actions you've got to add to your mundane actions, and again we'll go through that in another video. Or you can use your memory, or any other way that you and your friends might agree to do that bookkeeping that's necessary. So Luther spent 1 action to move closer to his opponent. Now, you can measure ranges at any time for any reason in this game. All you have to meet in terms of rules in that regard is if anyone asks you why you're doing a measurement, then you must answer. At any other time, if they're not interested or they don't feel like asking, you can measure away to your heart's content. That's the only rule. Pre-measurement is king in this game. So, we can determine that Luther Draxos is now just over 3 inches, or 3.5 inches away from Hephaestus Zant. So he has a range of things he can do at this point. Luther has a number of attacks on his card. He doesn't have any ranged attacks, but he does have some magical attacks that will cost a number of actions. Now, Luther has a range of things that he can do with his remaining actions. He can use abilities, which is a special type of action. He may use an attack, which is a different type of action. He may continue using universal actions such as walking, climbing, or charging, and each one of these actions will have a cost value. You'll simply pay the cost value and perform the action. Whether it's a success or failure might be dependent on dice you'll need to roll, but that's generally how it's done. So in this case, we're going to use an ability action. Now, ability actions are quite special because they can only be used once per activation per model. So if a model had 5 abilities, for example, they could use any or all of those 5 abilities, but only once in that activation, provided they could pay for them. So whether they're successful or unsuccessful, you're still not allowed to use it again. So Luther has an ability called Telluric Shift, which has 0 cost, which means he doesn't need to pay anything to do it, but because it's an ability, he can only try it the once. It has a target number of 5, and it lets me roll 1 dice to meet that target number. I could concentrate in order to increase the number of dice I roll for this, but then that will take a free action and give it a cost of 1, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to just trust to luck. So I need a 5 or greater in order to get this spell off. I've got a 6, so it works. Now, what this does, the model is immediately subject to Translocate 3, and Translocate 3 just means you pick a direction and push the model however many inches it specifies in that direction, so it's 3. So in this case, I'm going to pick this direction and simply push the model 3 inches in that direction. So I've still got 5 actions left which I can use against my opponent. I'm going to, at this point, do a melee attack. So attacks are different from abilities. You can use them any number of times a turn to indicate how familiar in this very violent land of Malorian models are with using attacks. So Luther has a 1 cost, so I'll pay that cost, melee action called Hammer Swing. It gives me 1 dice, and it's a range of 1 inch, as most melee actions are. And if it hits, the target enemy model will gain a point of damage. So I'm going to roll that now. Now the number I need to roll against is not the same for abilities that have a target number. Attacks do not have a specified target number. It's always assumed to be the defense statistic of the opposing model, unless it specifically says something else. So, for example, some of Hephaestus Zant's attacks will target your willpower instead. So Hephaestus Zant has a willpower defense rather. Sorry about that. A defense of 7. So I need on 1 dice to get 7 or greater to score a hit. I get a 3, so it's a miss. At this point, I can choose to retain all my actions, to do nothing more with them, because in this game you are able to build up actions turn by turn until you hit your limit. And different models have different limits in terms of actions that they can store. Or I can keep going. So I'm actually going to keep going because Luther Draxus is a very noble paladin type wizard, and he wants to put the beat down on Zant, who's a very shady character indeed. This time he's going to try something a bit different because he's not very likely to hit 7 or more on a d10, not always easy. So he's going to spend 1 action to concentrate, and I'll put a little token next to him for that. Now concentrate represents preparing for another action. You don't have to use that concentrate on the very next thing you do, and you can keep it between turns up to a certain limit of concentration tokens. But whenever you take an ability or an action that requires a dice roll, you can immediately spend it. So I'm going to do that when I buy another Hammer Swing. So that concentration means, in addition to the 1 dice I get for the Hammer Swing, I add 2 more dice to the roll. Now this means if I score equal or higher with any of these dice, I'm going to get a hit. And in an attack, the more hits you get, the better the attack will be. And we'll talk about that when we roll the dice. So I'm looking for 7s. Okay, I get 1 9, 1 2 and 1 3. So that means that these 2 immediately miss. They do nothing. This one, however, is a hit. Well, when you score 1 hit against an opponent, it means the attack was successful, and you apply the effects of the attack, whatever it is. And in this case, it's 1 damage. So Hephaestus Zant would take a point of damage. And again, you don't have to mark it here. There's a number of ways to mark it, and I'm sure you and your friends can agree the best way suitable for the way that you want to play. But for the purposes of this video, I'll just mark the damage that way. In addition, depending on the number of hits you get something called bonus damage from the rulebook. So if you hit once, it's a stun. It just means that the attack is successful, with a caveat that we'll discuss in a minute. If you hit twice, it adds +1 damage to the hit. 1 for being 1 over what would be a success. If you hit 3 times, then it would add +2 damage, 1 for every hit over the initial one. And it caps at 4 hits or more, which adds +3 damage to the attack. So in this way, even quite weak hits can be boosted to a significant level if you're lucky enough to roll the hits. But in this case, only 1 hit means 1 damage. Now the caveat that I mentioned earlier for a stun, the first time in any game round in which a model is stunned, it takes a penalty in addition to whatever else it would take from the attack. Now in this case, the penalty adds a cost of +1 to the next action that model tries to take on its next activation. So in this case, if Hephaestus Zant were to activate, whatever he would do that would cost him actions would cost him 1 extra action, and then the cost would be paid and you would remove the marker, or however again that you want to keep that, bookkeep that. So, what is Luther going to continue to do? He's still got 2 actions left, not a huge amount. He could do another concentrated Hammer Swing. Is there anything else he can do? The answer is yes. For the cost of 2, he can do an Empowered Strike, which again is a range 1 melee attack, but it's magically empowered. So this will give him 3 dice, which is pretty similar to a concentrated initial Hammer Swing, but this attack is slightly different. If it succeeds, the enemy model will get 1 damage as usual, but it'll also gain 1 Distort. Distort is a condition in the game, usually associated with House Durant, that means whenever you make an attack against a model with Distort, you can spend a Distort token on that model to reduce that model's defense value by 1 for the duration of the attack. It kind of interferes with the physical properties of their armour or their defensive wards. That's the backstory behind it. So it makes House Durance attacks slightly more efficient. So let's try this Empowered Strike. Again, I need 7s, so not easy to hit. Zant's got very good defence. I get 1/7. So I immediately apply another damage point. I will also apply a point of Distort. But because it's the second time in a game round that I've stunned a model, because I've only hit once with the 7, the 1 and the 3 do not hit, extra benefits of stun do not apply. So it's only the first time in a game round, so there'll be no additional debuff of the action, or in this case it's called Burden, on the model. So I took it away earlier and forgot to put it back. There it is. So at the end of Luther Draxos' activation, he's done a number of actions. He's done a number of attacks which have left his opponent wounded twice. So it's a small amount of damage. Zant has at least 14 more. It's also left a slight debuff in terms of the next attack that Luther makes will be slightly more effective or efficient. And it's debuffed the opponent's ability to generate actions. So whatever they do is at -1 action. So Luther's managed to spread a number of conditions and effects onto his opponent and damage to hopefully soften him up for future rounds. So that's how you can do some attacks and abilities in the Roots of Magic.